Blood angels, the golden sons of Baal. There is a particular cruelty in being the most beautiful thing in a universe defined by horror. The blood angels are the finest soldiers the emperor of mankind ever made, warriors of such physical perfection and martial grace that lesser beings sometimes mistake them for angels, descended from a heaven that the 41st millennium has long since proven does not exist. They fight with a precision and ferocity that other Space Marine chapters can admire but not replicate. They paint with the delicate hands of artists and slaughter with those same hands in the next moment without any sense of contradiction. They are, by every external measure, the best of what the Adeptus Astartes can be. They are also dying. Not from battle, though battle claims them in abundance. Not from disease or age, or the entropy that grinds every institution in the Imperium to dust across the millennia. The blood angels are dying from within, from a flaw written into their gene seed at the moment of their creation, from the inheritance of a Primarch who was the most beloved of the Emperor's sons, and whose death at the hands of the War Master Horus left a wound in the chapter's collective psyche that 10,000 years have not closed. The Black Rage and the Red Thirst are not metaphors. They are medical conditions and spiritual crises and existential threats simultaneously, and the Blood Angels carry them as they carry everything, with a beauty that makes the tragedy worse. This is their story. Baal, the world that made them. To understand the Blood Angels, you must first understand Baal, because Baal explains everything. It explains why the Blood Angels fight the way they do. It explains why their culture carries the weight it does. It explains why Sanguinius became the kind of Primarch he became, and why his sons became the kind of warriors they became, and why the beauty and the darkness are so thoroughly inseparable in everything they do. Baal is a death world. This is not a casual descriptor in the parlance of the 41st millennium. It means a planet where the environment actively and continuously attempts to kill everything living on it. Where survival is not a baseline condition but an ongoing achievement that must be renewed every day. Baal is a desert world, radiation-scarred from ancient nuclear devastation, orbited by two moons, Baal Primus and Baal Secundus, that are themselves hostile to life. The surface of Baal is a wasteland of irradiated sand and shattered rock, where the sun beats down through an atmosphere thinned by millennia of catastrophe, where water is precious beyond calculation and shade is a luxury. The native fauna has adapted to this environment by becoming lethal. The native human population has adapted by becoming something harder than human in all but biological classification. The people of Baal and its moons live in tribes, nomadic or semi-nomadic, moving through the wasteland in search of the resources that keep them alive another day. They worship the Emperor as the great angel, a divine figure whose image they carry in their tribal iconography, painted in gold and red on banners and armor made from salvaged materials that have passed through enough hands that no one remembers their original purpose. These people are tough in a way that residents of more hospitable worlds cannot fully imagine. They have been forged by their environment into something that can endure conditions that would break a soldier from a civilized world in days. It is from these tribes that the Blood Angels recruit. The selection process begins with a competition so brutal that it serves as much as a cull as a recruitment drive. Tribal warriors from across Baal and its moons converge at Blood Angels' fortresses to compete in trials of strength, endurance, speed, and will that eliminate the vast majority of candidates before the formal testing even begins. Those who survive the tribal competition face the implantation process, and those who survive that face the years of training that precede full induction into the chapter. The result is a Space Marine who was already exceptional before the gene seed changed him, a warrior who was already capable of things most humans cannot manage, and who has then been elevated beyond that baseline by the transformation that creates an Astartes. The Baalite cultural inheritance shapes the Blood Angels in ways that distinguish them from chapters with softer origins. They understand scarcity. They understand that beauty is precious, specifically because it exists in a world that destroys beautiful things without hesitation or apology. They understand that life is a constant contest with forces that would end it. And they have made their peace with that contest in the way of people who have never known anything else. Sanguinius, the great angel. The Primarchs were the Emperor's masterworks, 20 demigods crafted from phonegenetic material and elevated beyond humanity to serve as the living exemplars of what the Adeptus Astartes could aspire to become. Each carried his maker's gifts, his maker's ambitions, and in some cases his maker's flaws in amplified form. Sanguinius was among the most gifted and the most beloved of the 20, and his story is the defining context for everything the Blood Angels have been in the 10,000 years since his death. He fell on Baal like the others fell on their worlds, his gestation pods scattered by the mysterious forces that separated the Primarchs from the Emperor before any of them reached their intended destinations. He landed not among the nomadic tribes of the desert, but in an even harsher region, a place so irradiated that the local mutant population had developed physical deformities that made survival itself an act of stubborn defiance against the environment's obvious preference. Among these people, Sanguinius was immediately extraordinary. He was beautiful in a way that the people of Baal had no reference point for, physically perfect in a world defined by imperfection, and he carried from birth the great white wings that would become the defining image of the Blood Angels and their Primarch alike. He was also marked from the beginning by the curse that would define his line. The Red Thirst, the Blood Angels' perpetual hunger for the vital fluid of their enemies, showed itself in Sanguinius early, and he mastered it through a discipline of will that became the template for his son's ongoing struggle with the same inheritance. That he could control it, that he chose to control it rather than surrender to it, is the central fact of his character and the model his chapter has attempted to follow ever since. He was not a being without darkness. He was a being who chose, every day, not to be ruled by his darkness. He rose to leadership among the people of Baal through a combination of physical power, tactical brilliance, and a charisma so profound that it bordered on the supernatural. He killed the Chaos Mutant known as the Seekers, a being that had terrorized the tribes of Baal for years. And then he did something more significant. He did not take the throne by force, but earned the acknowledgement of the tribal leaders through a process of genuine persuasion. He could have simply dominated. He chose to lead. This distinction matters and recurs throughout his history as Primarch. When the Emperor found him, as he found all the Primarchs eventually, Sanguinius was already the undisputed lord of Baal and its moons. He was also already something more than simply a powerful warrior. He was a visionary, a being who understood that the purpose of power was not its accumulation, but its application towards something worth protecting. He joined the Great Crusade as the commander of the Revenant Legion, the force of warriors who had been assembled in his image before his recovery, and he immediately began reshaping that legion into the Blood Angels that history would remember. What made Sanguinius distinctive among the Primarchs was not his physical power, though that power was extraordinary, and not his tactical brilliance, though that too was genuine. It was the combination of qualities that should have been incompatible in a being designed for war. Genuine tenderness alongside the capacity for devastating violence, a commitment to beauty in a role that required the constant production of destruction, a humility that coexisted with the certainty of his own worth. He loved his warriors with a directness that other Primarchs expressed more obliquely or not at all. He knew each of his sons, individually, in a legion of many thousands. And that knowledge was not the administrative knowledge of a commander who reads personnel files, but the genuine knowledge of a father who pays attention. He also carried the weight of prophecy. Sanguinius is one of the few Primarchs confirmed to have possessed genuine precognitive ability, and what he saw is one of the darkest elements of his story. He knew. The lore establishes across multiple sources that Sanguinius foresaw his own death and the manner of it. He knew he would face Horus. He knew he would not survive that meeting. And he went anyway, not because he was resigned to it, but because he had done the calculation that his death might purchase something necessary and found the price worth paying. The courage this required is of a different order than the courage of a warrior who does not know what is coming. Sanguinius walked into his death with open eyes, and the Blood Angels have been living with that knowledge for 10,000 years, and it has made their love of him something beyond simple admiration. It has made it grief that never reaches completion, because the wound is too deliberate to be processed as mere tragedy. The Ninth Legion and the Great Crusade. Before Sanguinius was found, the warriors of the Ninth Legion were known by a different name, the Blood Drinkers, a title that reflected the dangerous instabilities of their gene seed in a more explicit and troubling form than the Blood Angels name that replaced it. The early Ninth Legion was effective in battle, but alarming in the manner of that effectiveness. Their thirst a barely contained force that their commanders struggled to manage, and their brother legions regarded with unease. Sanguinius changed this not by eliminating the thirst, but by giving it a context, a culture, and a discipline that transformed it from a liability into something the legion could carry with their heads raised. He established the rites and practices that allowed his warriors to manage the hunger, the ceremonies that acknowledged what they were without celebrating the worst of it, the traditions of artistry and refinement that served as counterweights to the violence that their nature demanded. Under his leadership, the Ninth Legion became something it had never been, a force that was both terrifying to its enemies and comprehensible to its allies. The Great Crusade gave Sanguinius and his legion a century of war across thousands of worlds. And in that time, the Blood Angels built a reputation that was both deserved and singular. They were the most aesthetically conscious of the legions, maintaining traditions of painting and sculpture and music in the intervals between campaigns in a way that other commanders sometimes found puzzling. They were also among the most devastatingly effective fighters in the Crusade. Their combination of physical perfection, tactical excellence, and the barely contained ferocity of their nature, making them instruments of a quality that even the Emperor's most demanding standards could acknowledge. Their tactical doctrine in this period favored the drop assault, the sudden aerial insertion directly onto the objective that became so associated with their style of warfare that it persisted into the chapter practices of the post-heresy Blood Angels and their successors. Jump packs and the ability to deliver a concentrated hammer blow directly to the enemy's critical point, bypassing defensive lines that would delay more conventional advances, reflected both the Blood Angels' physical capabilities and the psychological component of their method. The shock of seeing winged warriors descending from the sky into the heart of your formation is a disruption that no tactical manual can fully account for, and the Blood Angels used it deliberately. The Heresy-era Blood Angels fought at some of the Crusade's most challenging engagements, including boarding actions against the largest vessels in the expanded Imperium's history, siege warfare against fortresses that had been defended for generations, and open field engagements where their jump assault capability gave them advantages that more conventionally equipped legions could not replicate. They were not the most numerous legion. They were not, by raw measure, the most powerful. But they were, in the considered opinion of commanders who had fought alongside many of the legions, the most complete, the closest to the ideal of what a legion of Space Marines was supposed to be. Sanguinius himself fought at the Emperor's side in some of the Crusade's most significant engagements. His relationship with the Emperor was one of genuine warmth, the kind of relationship that the Emperor, a being who had largely transcended conventional emotional expression, managed with very few of his sons. And his relationship with his brothers varied widely. He was one of the few Primarchs who managed genuine friendship with Horus, the War Master, a fact that made what came later incomprehensible and unbearable in equal measure. He was also close to Guilliman and to Ferrus Manus, and the social architecture of the Primarch's relationships is illuminated by the fact that Sanguinius occupied a central position in it, a being whom even the most difficult of his brothers found it hard to actively dislike. The Horus Heresy and Cygnus Prime. The Horus Heresy is the defining catastrophe of the Warhammer 40,000 setting, the moment when half the Space Marine legions turned against the Emperor, and the Blood Angels' role in it was shaped by a double horror: the attempt to corrupt them before the larger conflict even reached its crisis point, and then the loss of Sanguinius at the hands of the very brother he had loved. Cygnus Prime was the Chaos Trap. As the heresy began and the traitor legions made their opening moves, a false distress signal drew the Blood Angels to the Cygnus Cluster, a region that had been prepared by the forces of Chaos, specifically the daemons of Slaanesh and Khorne, as a killing ground. The entire Cygnus Cluster had been transformed into a Chaos realm, a place where the barrier between real space and the warp had been deliberately destroyed, and the Blood Angels arrived to find their destination already corrupted beyond anything their briefings had prepared them for. What followed was the most severe test of the Legion's existence. In an environment saturated with chaos energy, with daemons materializing from every shadow and the very fabric of reality working against them, the Red Thirst became a weapon pointed at the Blood Angels themselves. The Chaos Forces had specifically chosen this environment because they knew what the Blood Angels carried, and they understood how to use it against them. The first manifestations of what would later be recognized as the Black Rage occurred at Cygnus Prime. Warriors overcome by a vision of Sanguinius's death that had not yet happened, driven into a fighting madness that was both militarily effective and spiritually devastating. The scale of the demon forces arrayed against the Blood Angels at Cygnus was not a conventional military challenge. It was an attempt at annihilation designed by intelligences that had access to information about the Legion's weaknesses that no mortal enemy could have possessed. The Daemons of Khorne were sent because they represented the antithesis of everything Sanguinius had built in his culture of artistry and restraint, beings of pure combat rage that the Blood Angels' own worst impulses could resonate with. The Daemons of Slaanesh were sent because the seductive pull of sensation could exploit the Red Thirst through a different mechanism, offering a kind of completion to a hunger that was never meant to be satisfied. Sanguinius himself faced a confrontation with the bloodthirster Karbanda that left him broken-boned and the daemon banished, and then faced the chaos corruption of his own warriors and his own soul in ways that the standard heresy-era histories do not fully capture. The Blood Angels survived Cygnus Prime. They emerged from it changed, the seeds of the Black Rage planted in a way that would manifest across the generations of Astartes who followed. Some scholars of the heresy have argued that Cygnus was the moment when the Flaw, as the chapter knows it, was fully inscribed in the gene seed, when the psychic resonance of what the Blood Angels experienced created the channel through which Sanguinius's death would eventually echo into every warrior who carried his bloodline. Whether or not that interpretation is correct, the facts of the outcome are not in dispute. After Cygnus Prime, the Blood Angels were different. The final act of the heresy for Sanguinius came at the Siege of Terra, the battle for the Imperial Palace itself, and specifically in his confrontation with Horus aboard the War Master's battle barge. The details of that confrontation belong to some of the most discussed and debated passages in the Horus Heresy novel series. What is established in the lore is the outcome. Sanguinius died at Horus's hands, killed by the Primarch, who had been his brother, and who had been transformed by chaos into something that could kill the most beloved of the Emperor's sons. He did not die easily, and some readings of the lore suggest that it was Sanguinius who cracked the armor that Horus wore, making the Emperor's subsequent killing blow possible. He may have given his life to make his father's victory possible. The Blood Angels have believed this for 10,000 years. Whether it is literally true is a question the lore has never fully resolved, and that ambiguity serves the story well. The psychic detonation of Sanguinius's death at the moment of its occurrence sent a shockwave through every Blood Angels warrior fighting at Terra. Warriors fell to the ground. Others were overcome by visions. The legion that had just survived Cygnus Prime was hit again, in the moment of the heresy's resolution, by a blow to the collective psyche from which it has never fully recovered. They won. The heresy ended. Horus died. And the Blood Angels staggered out of the siege, carrying a wound that their armor could not cover and their surgeons could not treat. The Flaw, red thirst and black rage, the Blood Angels' defining characteristic, the thing that makes them simultaneously more and less than the Adeptus Astartes standard, is the Flaw. It has two expressions, and both must be understood to understand the chapter. The red thirst is the older manifestation, the one that was present in some form even before Sanguinius was recovered. It is a compulsive desire for blood, a hunger that builds during combat and pushes Blood Angels warriors toward the most savage possible expression of their violence. At its most controlled, it is an enhancement, a battle focus that sharpens perception and amplifies aggression in ways that make a Blood Angels warrior in close combat something terrifying to behold. At its worst, it is a loss of self, a surrender to an animalistic drive that strips away the artistry and the discipline and leaves only the hunger. The Blood Angels manage the red thirst through the rite of the Sanguinary Chalice, a ceremony in which the blood of Sanguinius, preserved across the millennia in sacred repositories, is consumed by the warriors of the chapter in a ritual that is simultaneously a psychological anchor and a spiritual act. The blood of the Primarch speaks to some part of the gene seed that the thirst also comes from, and the communion calms what the thirst would inflame. It does not eliminate the thirst. It does not cure it. It manages it, and management is the most the Blood Angels have ever been able to achieve. The thirst also informs the Blood Angels' approach to close-quarters combat in ways that other chapters recognize but cannot fully replicate. A Blood Angels warrior entering a melee is not simply executing a tactical decision. They're engaging with an aspect of their own nature in a controlled environment, using the structure of formal combat to channel what the thirst demands into something directed and purposeful. The discipline required to do this, to use the hunger without being consumed by it, is one of the most demanding aspects of Blood Angels training, and one of the qualities their chaplains assess most carefully in young warriors showing signs of advancement through the chapter's ranks. The Black Rage is more severe and ultimately irreversible. It is the thing that truly kills the chapter slowly, because every warrior who falls to it is lost not to the enemy, but to themselves. The Black Rage is a psychic echo of Sanguinius's death. At the moment of his destruction at Horus's hands, something in the Primarch's psyche shattered and left an imprint in the gene seed of every Blood Angels warrior who would ever live. When the Black Rage takes hold, it does so by overwhelming the present mind with the past experience. The warrior loses their own identity and becomes Sanguinius in the last moments of his life, experiencing the betrayal, the pain, the fall, in real time, as if it is happening to them now. They see Horus. They feel the wounds. They hear the sounds of the siege. The present becomes inaccessible, buried under the weight of a 10,000-year-old death that the gene seed insists is happening right now. A warrior taken by the Black Rage does not recover. There is no treatment, no reversal, no ceremony that can reach through that overwhelming flood of inherited memory and retrieve the person underneath. What remains is a fighting engine, a warrior of extraordinary physical capability who is experiencing a continuous nightmare and who can be pointed at the enemy with some reliability but cannot be reasoned with, cannot be commanded in any conventional sense, cannot be anything other than what the Rage has made them. The onset of the Black Rage is not always sudden. Warriors who study their own gene seed signals can sometimes identify early warning signs. Moments when the boundary between their own perceptions and the inherited memory of Sanguinius's death grows thinner than it should be. These warriors sometimes report the experience to their chaplains, and the chaplains work with them through intensified ritual practice, through art, through the rite of the sanguinary chalice performed at increased frequency, trying to hold the line. Sometimes this works. The onset is delayed. Sometimes it does not. The chapter has never developed reliable early intervention methods, partly because the rage operates at a level deeper than the conscious practices that manage the thirst, and partly because the warriors who might have contributed the most to understanding its mechanism have generally ended up in the Death Company before they could complete that research. The chapter does not abandon these warriors. They are placed in the Death Company. The Death Company. The Death Company is the Blood Angels' response to the Black Rage, and it is one of the more remarkable institutional solutions to an intractable problem anywhere in the Adeptus Astartes. The warriors who fall to the Rage are not imprisoned or put down or quietly removed from the chapter's records. They are armored in black to honor the darkness that has taken them, and sent into battle at the point of greatest danger, where their uncontrollable ferocity can be directed against enemies rather than spent in madness in a cell. The armor of the Death Company bears the red saltires of Sanguinius's wounds, the marks of the killing blows that their occupants are perpetually experiencing, and they are accompanied into battle by chaplains whose role is as much shepherd as military officer. The Death Company chaplains, sometimes called reclusiarchs in senior positions, maintain a relationship with their charges that is one of the more unusual pastoral arrangements in the galaxy. They cannot reach the warriors through their rage. They can sometimes be heard, sometimes be responded to in ways that suggest some fragment of the person underneath is still present. They guide the Death Company toward the enemy, and they speak the rites of mourning over warriors who are already dead in everything but biological function. The specific rites performed over Death Company warriors before they go into battle are among the Blood Angels' most sacred and private ceremonies. The chaplain speaks over each warrior individually, naming them by their full designation and listing their service record in a recitation that acknowledges the person who existed before the rage took them. This is not a memorial service. The warrior is still alive, still standing there, still hearing the words even if they cannot respond to them coherently. It is an act of witness, of insisting on the personhood of someone the darkness has almost entirely consumed. And it is performed because the Blood Angels refuse to reduce their brothers to weapons, even in the moments when those brothers can be nothing else. Death Company warriors fight with an abandon that has no equivalent in the Adeptus Astartes. They do not seek cover. They do not assess tactical situations or look for flanking opportunities or manage their ammunition with care. They simply advance, absorbing damage that would stop any other warrior, continuing to fight through wounds that should be fatal, driven by the inherited memory of a Primarch's last moments into a killing fury that ends only when they, or everything in front of them, is destroyed. They are extraordinarily effective. They are also mourned by their brothers before they go into battle, because everyone understands that a warrior in the Death Company is not coming back. There are accounts in the Blood Angels' private histories of Death Company warriors who, in the final moments of a battle, seemed to return briefly to themselves, who recognized their chaplain or said a name from their former life before the end came. Whether these accounts are literally true or are the kind of stories that institutions tell themselves because they need them to be true is not a question the Blood Angels press very hard. The possibility that something of the person survives inside the rage, that the darkness has not entirely won, is one of the things that makes the Death Company bearable as an institution. Institutions can survive anything they can find meaning in, and the Blood Angels have found meaning in honoring their fallen, even as they send them to their deaths. The Death Company's existence is one of the Blood Angels' most carefully guarded secrets. The Ecclesiarchy and the broader Imperium know that the Blood Angels have unusual combat traditions. They do not know the full truth of what the Black Rage is and what it does, because that knowledge, if widely disseminated, would constitute grounds for the chapter's dissolution as genetically compromised. The Blood Angels have survived for 10,000 years by managing this secret alongside the Rage itself, a second burden that sits alongside the first with equal weight. Every interaction with Imperial authorities requires the maintenance of a fiction sophisticated enough to explain the Death Company's presence on battlefields without explaining what it actually is. And the chapter has had 10,000 years of practice constructing and maintaining that fiction. The Sanguinary Guard and the High Chapel. The Blood Angels' organizational structure reflects the dual nature of the chapter, the beauty and the darkness coexisting in institutional form. The Sanguinary Guard are the elite, the finest warriors in a chapter of fine warriors, equipped with artificer armor of extraordinary quality, and the glaives in carmine that serve as their signature weapons. They are the bodyguard of the chapter master, the honor guard of the chapter's traditions, and the living embodiment of everything Sanguinius represented in terms of martial and aesthetic excellence. Their golden armor is not ceremonial. It is functional, maintained at standards that reflect the chapter's perfectionism about everything it builds and everything it wears. The Sanguinary Guard go to war as a display of what the Blood Angels are at their best, and the visual contrast between their golden perfection and the black-armored Death Company fighting alongside them is one of the more striking tableaux in the 41st millennium's long catalogue of war. An enemy who can observe both formations simultaneously is watching the full range of what the Blood Angels carry, the aspiration and the curse expressed simultaneously in gold and black. The chapter master of the Blood Angels, currently Dante in the late 41st millennium lore, occupies a position that is more complex than the equivalent role in most chapters. He must manage an institution that has two simultaneously true things at its core. It is the finest fighting force in the Adeptus Astartes by most measures, and it is dying from within. The administrative demands of that combination, the maintenance of military effectiveness alongside the management of the Flaw and the secrecy that surrounds it, require a leader of considerable sophistication in dimensions beyond the tactical. Commander Dante, who leads the Blood Angels in the current era of the setting, is the oldest space marine in the Imperium who is not a dreadnought. He has served as chapter master for over 1,000 years. An extraordinary tenure that reflects both his personal capabilities and the particular demands of the role. There are very few beings in the chapter with the combination of experience, judgment, and institutional knowledge required to manage what the Blood Angels require of their leader. His age also means he has seen more cycles of the chapter's recurring crises than any other living warrior. And his perspective on the Flaw and its management is accordingly more comprehensive than any documentation can capture. The High Chaplains of the Blood Angels maintain the chapter's spiritual traditions with a depth of understanding that comes from knowing the full truth of what they are managing. The role of the chaplaincy in the Blood Angels is weightier than in most chapters because the spiritual health of the warriors is not merely a morale issue. It is a direct defense against the rage and the thirst, and a chaplain who cannot hold the line between a warrior's present self and the inherited darkness is a chaplain who will watch brothers fall to the black rage before their time. The librarians of the chapter carry an additional burden: Blood Angels. Librarians are among the most powerful psychers in the Adeptus Astartes. Their connection to the resonant psychic echo of Sanguinius's death, giving them access to emotional and psychic currents that other chapters' librarians simply do not encounter. They must manage their own susceptibility to the rage, while also serving as the chapter's primary resource for detecting the early signs of the rage's onset in other warriors. They are both vulnerable and essential, and their training reflects this precarious position. A Blood Angel's librarian who cannot hold themselves together in the presence of the psychic weight their gene seed carries cannot be trusted to help their brothers hold together. And the selection process for the librarius accordingly involves tests that would break warriors from other chapters who had never had to defend their minds against the specific pressure of their own inheritance. The successor chapters and the curse. The Blood Angels are one of the founding chapters of the Second Founding, established after the Horus Heresy when the surviving legions were broken into smaller, more manageable formations. From the Blood Angels came a number of successor chapters that carry their progenitor's gene seed and, with it, the Flaw. The most prominent successors include the Flesh Tearers, the Angels Sanguine, the Blood Drinkers, the Angels Vermilion, the Lamenters, and several others whose exact relationship to the Blood Angels lineage is debated in various Imperial records. Each of these chapters carries the Red Thirst and the Black Rage in some form, though the expression varies between them in ways that suggest the Flaw interacts differently with individual chapter cultures and training regimens. The Flesh Tearers are the most extreme example of what happens when the Blood Angel's inheritance is managed with less of the refinement that Sanguinius built into his legion's culture. They are effective warriors, but barely controlled. Their red thirst closer to the surface than most Blood Angels would find comfortable. Their death company proportionally larger and more frequently active. They have been the subject of multiple inquisitorial investigations over the millennia and have survived those investigations by the narrowest of margins, protected partly by their military value and partly by Blood Angels' advocacy. They are what the Blood Angels might have become if the culture of artistry and discipline had not taken root. Their chapter master Seth, a figure who appears prominently in the late 41st millennium lore, is a warrior who embodies the Flesh Tearers' particular expression of the Blood Angels' lineage. Honest about what his chapter is in a way that some find refreshing and others find alarming. Unwilling to maintain the careful fictions that the Blood Angels practice with such sophistication. Fighting with a directness that reflects a chapter that has stopped trying to look like something other than what it is. Whether this honesty is admirable or dangerous is a question the Blood Angels themselves have debated in private for generations. The Lamenters are perhaps the most tragic of the successors, a chapter whose history reads as a continuous accumulation of catastrophe, that even by the standards of a setting defined by catastrophe is remarkable. They were implicated, somewhat unfairly by most accounts, in the Badab War on the rebellious side, and spent a century-long penitent crusade that stripped them to near extinction before they were granted the reprieve of reinforcement. They were then virtually destroyed by Hive Fleet Kraken before they could recover. They were rebuilt again, slowly and painfully, and destroyed again by subsequent Tyrannid encounters. Their flaw manifests with particular severity, and their chapter culture has developed around a kind of stoic acceptance of suffering that other Blood Angels' successors find both admirable and deeply melancholy. They maintain the standards of conduct that the Blood Angels' lineage demands, even in circumstances that would excuse departure from those standards. And this integrity in the face of continuous disaster is the thing their sibling chapters most admire and most find heartbreaking about them. The Angels Sanguine are notable for a different reason. They maintain extreme secrecy about their chapter's practices, with members keeping their faces concealed even among battle brothers of other chapters. The reasons for this secrecy are not publicly documented, but the speculation in various Imperial circles involves the Flaw in forms that the Angels Sanguine have chosen to manage through complete informational isolation, rather than the more integrated approach of the parent chapter. Whether this represents a more severe manifestation of the Flaw, or simply a different cultural response to the same manifestation, is not information the Angels Sanguine have chosen to share. The Blood Drinkers represent perhaps the most direct echo of the Revenant Legion's pre-Sanguinius identity, carrying the old name that was set aside when the Primarch transformed his legion's culture. Their practices around the Red Thirst are more explicit than those of the parent chapter, less mediated through ceremony, and more direct in their acknowledgement of what the thirst is and what it demands. They have maintained their status as a loyal chapter of the Adeptus Astartes across the millennia, but their relationship with the ecclesiarchy is complicated by the directness with which they practice their relationship to blood in ways that other imperial institutions prefer to be more circumspect about. The Angels Vermilion are among the least documented of the successors. Their chapter history preserved in records that are notably sparse compared to their siblings. What is documented suggests a chapter that has taken the Blood Angels' secretiveness about the Flaw to an extreme, minimizing their interactions with the broader Imperium to a degree that makes other insular chapters look positively gregarious. They fight where they are needed. They do not explain themselves. The Primaris and the Great Rift. The coming of the Great Rift, the massive tear in reality, split the galaxy in the wake of the events of the Gathering Storm, brought the Blood Angels to one of the most severe crises in their history. The death of Sanguinius at Horus's hands 10,000 years ago had depleted the chapter in ways that had been slowly, painstakingly rebuilt across the millennia. The events surrounding the Great Rift threatened to undo that rebuilding comprehensively. The Devastation of Baal, the assault on the Blood Angels' home system by Hive Fleet Leviathan, was an extinction-level event for the chapter that was avoided only by the arrival of Roboute Guilliman and the Primaris Space Marines he brought with him. The Tyranid assault on Baal itself was on the verge of achieving what 10 millennia of enemies had failed to accomplish when the warp storms of the Great Rift destroyed the Hive Fleet's synaptic coherence. And then, Guilliman arrived with reinforcements of a kind the Blood Angels had never encountered. The Primaris Marines introduced to the Blood Angels are a complex addition to the chapter's culture, for reasons beyond the standard institutional tensions that Primaris integration creates. The question of whether Primaris Blood Angels carry the Flaw was answered in the affirmative, and the answer was received with a mixture of relief and despair. Relief, because warriors without the Flaw would have been outsiders within the chapter's culture in ways that would have damaged unit cohesion. Despair, because the Flaw's presence means the Primaris have inherited the same slow death that their predecessors have always carried. The integration of Primaris warriors into Blood Angels' traditions has been one of the more significant institutional challenges the chapter has faced in the current era. These warriors were created by Call's processes, trained in doctrines that reflect Guilliman's Reformation priorities, and in many cases carry cultural assumptions that differ from the ancient Blood Angels' ways. The art traditions, the rite of the sanguinary chalice, the specific relationship to the chaplaincy and the librarius that the Blood Angels have developed over 10,000 years. All of these must be transmitted to warriors whose creation bypassed the standard Blood Angels training pipeline. The chapter has approached this transmission with the same seriousness it brings to everything. Primaris Blood Angels are inducted into the full truth of what they carry not long after their arrival in the chapter, in ceremonies that the veterans of the pre-Primaris force conduct with the gravity that the occasion demands. You are Blood Angels. This is what that means. This is the Flaw. This is the thirst and the rage. This is the Death Company, and this is why it exists. And this is what happens to warriors who fall to what you now also carry. The Primaris have absorbed this knowledge with varying degrees of equanimity. All of them have chosen to remain. The Primaris have brought new capabilities. The Inceptors, the Intercessors, the Aggressors, the Hellblasters, all the new unit types that Guilliman's Reformation introduced carry Blood Angels livery and Blood Angels gene seed and, in the ways that matter most to the chapter, Blood Angels identity. They also bring a structural reinforcement that the depleted chapter desperately needed after the devastation of Baal. The Blood Angels are stronger now than they were at the moment of crisis. They are also more complex. The introduction of warriors who were created by a different process and who carry cultural assumptions from Guilliman's Reformation alongside the Blood Angels' ancient traditions, creating an institution that is still working out how to integrate these two inheritances. The working out is ongoing. It will take generations. The Blood Angels have managed longer-term projects than this. The culture of the chapter. To discuss the Blood Angels purely in terms of their curse and their battles is to miss something essential about what they are. The culture of the chapter is as significant as its military function, and the two are not separate things. The artistry and the violence exist in direct relationship to each other, each making sense only in the context of the other. Blood Angels warriors paint. This is not a hobby or an affectation. It is a practice that the chapter has maintained since Sanguinius himself established it. A discipline of attention and patience that serves as a counterweight to the consuming ferocity that their nature demands in combat. A warrior who can sit with a brush and a canvas and produce something beautiful has, in that act, demonstrated a control over the self that the thirst and the rage are always working to undermine. The paintings, produced in Blood Angel scriptoria and workshops across their fleet and their fortress monastery, range from the technically accomplished to the genuinely remarkable. And the chapter maintains collections that would be the pride of any cultural institution in the Imperium if the Imperium were the kind of civilization that valued such things. They sculpt, they compose music, they maintain written traditions that are literary as much as historical. The chapter's relationship to its own past is mediated through art in ways that other chapters manage through ritual or doctrine alone. The death of Sanguinius is not merely commemorated in the Blood Angels. It is continuously processed through artistic expression, a 10,000-year creative response to a wound that has not closed. Some of the most significant works in the Blood Angels collections are pieces created by warriors who died in the Death Company within months of completing them, who made something of lasting beauty and then lost themselves to the rage. The chapter keeps these pieces and knows their provenance, and the knowing is part of why they keep them. The reclusium of the Blood Angels is the heart of the chapter's spiritual life, and its chaplains are among the more sophisticated theologians in the Adeptus Astartes precisely because they have to be. The theology of the Blood Angels is not the standard imperial cult, though it draws from the same well of emperor worship. It is a theology that has to account for the flaw, that has to find meaning in the black rage, that has to explain to warriors facing the onset of that condition why the darkness that is consuming them is not a defeat, but a form of sacrifice. The chaplains who manage the Death Company are not simply warriors with Crozius Arcana and skull helms. They are philosophers who have thought harder about the nature of suffering and purpose than most imperial institutions require of their spiritual officers. The Red Grail, the sacred vessel that contains the preserved blood of Sanguinius, and from which the rite of the sanguinary chalice is conducted, is the most sacred physical object in the chapter's possession. Its maintenance, its protection, and the ritual practices surrounding it are the responsibility of the chief sanguinary priest, a role that combines the functions of a chaplain, an apothecary, and a high priest into something that has no exact equivalent in the broader Adeptus Astartes. The sanguinary priests are the chapter's primary defense against the thirst. Their ceremonies, the ongoing mechanism by which the Blood Angels manage what they carry. The aesthetics of the chapter extend to their military equipment in ways that are visible even on the battlefield. Blood Angels' armor is maintained at standards that go beyond functional necessity. Their vehicles are painted with a care that battlefield conditions make absurd, but that the chapter insists upon anyway, because the standard of their presentation is part of the standard of who they are. Weapons are ornamented. The bolter of a Blood Angels veteran may carry decorative work that took months to complete and will be scratched and damaged within minutes of deployment. The warrior completes it anyway. The effort is the point. Even the black armor of the Death Company carries the red saltires with a precision that speaks to the attention given to those warriors' final preparation. This is perhaps the most eloquent statement of the Blood Angels' cultural values, that they take the same care in preparing a warrior for their death as they take in preparing a warrior for continued service. That the quality of attention does not diminish when the outcome is certain. The golden aesthetic of the Sanguinary Guard, the deep red of the Standard Battle Brothers, the black of the Death Company, these are not just colors. They are a visual language that tells the Blood Angels' story in a glance, that encodes the pride and the tragedy and the eternal tension between beauty and darkness that defines the chapter's existence. An observer who does not know the Blood Angels' history can read that history in the colors of the warriors in front of them, if they know what they are looking at. The chapter wears its nature openly, in the one language it can use without exposing the secret that would destroy it. The Sanguinor and the Mystery. No account of the Blood Angels is complete without acknowledging the Sanguinor, the golden apparition that appears at moments of the chapter's greatest crisis, and whose nature has never been definitively explained in the lore. The Sanguinor appears as a golden warrior in full Sanguinary Guard armor, faceless behind a closed helm, fighting with extraordinary effectiveness in defense of the Blood Angels and their successors before vanishing without explanation. It does not speak. It does not identify itself. It appears, it fights, and it leaves behind the bodies of enemies that no other warrior present could account for killing. It has been recorded in engagements across thousands of years of Blood Angels history, in theaters far enough apart that no single Sanguinary Guard warrior could have been responsible for all appearances, and with a consistency of description across independent reports that rules out collective misidentification. The Sanguinor is real, whatever it is, and its reality is one of the few things about which the Blood Angels and their successors agree without qualification. The theories about the Sanguinor's nature have been debated within the chapter and among Imperial scholars for millennia. The most common are these: that it is the spiritual remnant of Sanguinius himself, a psychic echo of the Primarch powerful enough to manifest physically in moments of extremity. That it is a separate being entirely, perhaps a servant of the Emperor bound to the protection of the Ninth Legion's bloodline. That it is the collective hope of the Blood Angels given form, their faith in their Primarch's legacy made real by the weight of 10,000 years of devotion, and the peculiar psychic resonance of the Black Rage, which keeps Sanguinius's death alive in the gene seed of every warrior who carries it. The lore has never committed to any of these explanations, and the ambiguity serves the character of the Blood Angels well. The Sanguinor has been credited with saving specific warriors from specific deaths in ways that are too detailed and too specifically appropriate to be coincidental. There are accounts of it appearing at the moment a chapter master fell to take position between the fallen commander and the killing blow, buying the seconds necessary for other warriors to intervene. There are accounts of it fighting at the side of isolated squads cut off from reinforcement and on the verge of being overwhelmed, its appearance coinciding exactly with the warrior's final prayers to Sanguinius. Whether these accounts are literally true, embellished in the retelling, or true in ways that the literal reading does not fully capture, is a question the Blood Angels have learned to stop pressing. What the Sanguinor represents, regardless of what it actually is the possibility that Sanguinius has not entirely left his sons. The Blood Angels' theology has always included this possibility. The belief that a Primarch who loved his warriors as completely as Sanguinius did, who saw what was coming and chose it anyway for their sake, might not be entirely absent from the universe he sacrificed himself to defend. The Sanguinor makes that theology visible, makes it something that can be fought alongside and pointed at an enemy, and the chapter's relationship to it has always been as much emotional as theological. They need it to be what it might be. They cannot afford to examine that need too closely. They fight alongside it when it appears, and they do not ask questions that might require answers they could not carry. Notable engagements and campaigns. 10,000 years of warfare produces a history too vast for any summary to fully contain, but certain engagements stand out as particularly significant in shaping who the Blood Angels are. The War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium brought the Blood Angels into conflict with the largest orc warg in recorded Imperial history, an assault of such scale that it threatened the stability of the Imperium at a fundamental level. The Blood Angels fought in multiple theaters of this conflict, their jump assault capability making them particularly effective in the kind of fast-moving engagements that a planetary-scale orc invasion produces. The losses they sustained were significant, but what the War of the Beast cost the chapter in warriors it returned in institutional knowledge, in the understanding of how to fight at scales and under conditions that most chapters had no reference for. The Krypton Campaign, the battles against the Necrons of the Krypton Tomb World, established the Blood Angels' particular relationship with Xeno's enemies of a kind that resist the emotional triggers the Flaw creates. The Necrons do not bleed. They cannot be consumed by the thirst in the way flesh enemies can, and fighting them requires the Blood Angels to engage a form of discipline that is different from what they practice against organic opponents. It has made them, paradoxically, some of the more effective anti-Necron combatants in the Adeptus Astartes, precisely because the encounter forces them to fight with control rather than ferocity. The tactical lessons learned in the Krypton campaign have informed Blood Angels' doctrine in subsequent Necron engagements across the chapter's history. The defense of Gehenna against the forces of chaos demonstrated, not for the first time or the last, the particular challenge that demonic opponents represent for the Blood Angels. Chaos forces that understand the Flaw can attempt to weaponize it, to create conditions in which the thirst and the rage become liabilities rather than managed aspects of the warrior's nature. The Blood Angels have developed countermeasures to these tactics across centuries of engagement with chaos, doctrines and disciplines, and chaplain-led practices specifically designed to hold the line when the enemy is trying to push warriors toward the rage from the outside, rather than waiting for it to develop internally. The Badab War in the early years of the 38th millennium placed the Blood Angels and several of their successor chapters in a complex position, the kind of inter-adeptus conflict that the chapters of the Blood have always navigated with particular care given their shared secret. The succession of events that led to the Badab War and the roles played by the various Blood Angels successor chapters involved in it have been analyzed extensively in Imperial historical records, with the general conclusion that the Blood Angels' lineage managed the conflict with as much integrity as the circumstances permitted, though the circumstances were such that integrity and clarity were not always compatible. The long campaign against the Orc warlord Garkul Blackfang consumed a significant portion of the chapter's strength in the 32nd millennium, a grinding attritional conflict that tested the Blood Angels' ability to maintain their standards of discipline and artistry under conditions of sustained depletion. The chapter emerged from it reduced but intact, and the rebuilding that followed the campaign's conclusion became one of the chapter's most studied examples of institutional renewal. The process by which a depleted Blood Angels force restores itself without cutting corners on the cultural practices that make it what it is. The Armageddon campaigns against the forces of Warg Ghazghkull brought the Blood Angels into the same theater as multiple other chapters and gave the broader Adeptus Astartes a particularly close view of the chapter's methods. Other commanders noted the Death Company with the unease that it reliably produces in those who see it for the first time, and noted with equal unease the chaplains who managed them with the calm of professionals doing a job that has long since transcended the emotional register of anything that could be called ordinary. The Devastation of Baal stands as the most recent existential crisis in the chapter's long history. Hive Fleet Leviathan, one of the most powerful Tyranid incursions in recorded Imperial history, directed itself toward Baal with a focus that suggested either malign intelligence or cosmological inevitability. The Blood Angels called their successors home, assembled every warrior they could reach, and prepared for a defense of their home system that they understood. Going into it, they could not win. The analysis was correct. By every military measure available, the defense of Baal should have ended with the chapter's extinction and the world's consumption. What saved them was the combination of the Great Rift's disruption of the Hive Fleet's synaptic coherence and the arrival of Robut Guilliman's Primaris forces. The timing was as precise as it was implausible, and the Blood Angels have been debating ever since whether it represents the Emperor's will, statistical fortune, or something that operates in the space between those categories. What is not debated is the outcome. They survived. They were replenished, and they emerged from the devastation of Baal into the new reality of the Dark Imperium with enough strength to continue the work that has been their purpose since Sanguinius first led them into the Crusade 10,000 years ago. The weight of what they carry. The Blood Angels are 10,000 years old. They have fought in every major conflict the Imperium has endured since the Horus Heresy. They have produced some of the finest warriors in the history of the Adeptus Astartes, and buried more of those warriors than any chapter should have to bury. They have kept secrets that lesser institutions would have broken under the weight of, maintained standards of excellence that the Flaw should have made impossible, produced art and music and architecture amid the continuous business of a galaxy that wants nothing more than to kill everything good and beautiful within it. The Black Rage continues. Every generation of Blood Angels produces warriors who will eventually fall to it, who will lose themselves in the inherited memory of a death that happened 10 millennia ago and still has not finished happening. Because the gene seed carries what happened at Terra in a way that no amount of time or training can fully process or release. The Death Company is never empty. The chaplains are never finished with their work. The chapter's rolls of honor grow longer every decade, and too many of the names on them belong to warriors who died not from enemy action but from the weight of what their Primarch left inside them. There have been attempts to cure the Flaw. The Blood Angels, apothecaries and librarians have worked on this question continuously across the chapter's history, and some of the most significant figures in the chapter's past have devoted extended careers to it. The results have been uniformly insufficient. Partial solutions exist that manage the rate of onset, that extend the period before a warrior succumbs, that give chaplains more time to work with warriors showing early signs. None of these are cures. None of them alter the fundamental fact that the Flaw is written into the gene seed at a level that current Imperial science and Blood Angel psychic tradition cannot reach. The search continues. It has always continued. The Blood Angels do not stop looking for something simply because 10,000 years of searching have not found it. The Blood Angels' relationship to faith is distinctive within the Adeptus Astartes. The Imperial cult, the official religion of the Imperium that worships the Emperor as a god, sits uncomfortably with the Space Marines' self-understanding as weapons made flesh rather than worshippers. But the Blood Angels have always had something more specific than the general Imperial faith. A devotion to Sanguinius that functions as both ancestor worship and theological conviction. The belief that their Primarch was something more than a genetically engineered super soldier. That his beauty and his sacrifice and the curse he left in his gene seed are all part of a purpose that transcends the merely military. Whether this theology is correct is not a question the 41st millennium can easily answer. What is demonstrable is its function. The devotion to Sanguinius is the primary psychological resource that Blood Angels warriors use to hold the line between themselves and the Flaw, the anchor that keeps them present in moments when the rage would pull them into the past. This persistence in the face of failure is, in its way, the most Blood Angels thing about them. They are a chapter that has never been able to fully solve their central problem and has instead found ways to live inside it with a dignity that the problem's nature does not require, but that the chapter's nature demands. They paint, they fight, they lose brothers to the rage, and honor those brothers as fully as warriors who died in straightforward battle. They maintain standards that serve no immediate tactical purpose and every cultural purpose. They keep faith with a dead Primarch who loved them enough to walk into his own death for their sake. This is the Blood Angels' story, and it is not a story of unambiguous triumph. It is a story about what it costs to be what they are, about the price of beauty in a universe that destroys beautiful things, about the long consequence of a single death that happened at the highest point of the Imperium's history, and has been reverberating through the chapter's bloodline ever since. They are magnificent. They are tragic. They carry their curse with the same perfection with which they carry their weapons. Which is to say, extraordinarily well, and at a cost that no accounting can fully capture. The great angel is dead, his sons endure, and every time a Blood Angels warrior stands at the edge of the Black Rage and finds, in the memory of who Sanguinius was, and what he chose, enough to pull themselves back from the precipice, the Primarch's sacrifice does its work one more time. It is never enough. It is always enough. This is what it means to be Blood Angels.